The black sedan rolled down the quiet streets of Ravenhill, its tires whispering against the wet asphalt. Inside sat Edward Langston, a man who carried the calm of success and the quiet confidence of someone who had conquered the world outside, but not the one waiting at home. He loosened his tie and looked out the window at the familiar skyline. His assistant, seated beside the driver, glanced at the bouquet resting on Edward's lap. White lilies, freshly wrapped, their scent pure and soft. "Big night ahead, sir?" the assistant asked with a smile. Edward's lips curved faintly. "You could say that. Claudia hates surprises, but I'll risk it tonight." The assistant chuckled. "Your wife must miss you terribly." Edward smiled, his gaze softening as he imagined her face. "She always does." He leaned back, watching the streetlights flash across his face like a slow heartbeat. After 3 long weeks away, he was finally home. He pictured the laughter of his children, Eli, Grace, and little Noah, echoing down the halls, their small feet racing to greet him. The house would be filled with light, and Claudia's graceful smile would be the first thing he'd see. But the truth waiting inside that mansion would destroy everything he thought he knew. Hey, before we dive deeper into this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you think so far. Now let's get into it. The sedan slowed in front of the Langston mansion, a sprawling white brick estate resting atop a quiet hill. Its lights glowed faintly through the fog, but something about the atmosphere felt off. The gates opened slowly, creaking like a warning. Edward stepped out, lilies in hand. The air carried the faint scent of rain and pine. He exhaled, steadying his nerves. The thought of his wife's surprised face brought a boyish grin to his lips. He entered through the main doors, the butler greeting him quietly. "Good evening, Mr. Langston. You're home earlier than expected. Where's Mrs. Langston?" Edward asked, slipping off his coat. The butler hesitated. "In the sitting room, sir, with the children." Edward's heart lifted. "Perfect. Don't announce me. I want to surprise them." He moved quietly down the corridor. The house was as stunning as ever, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, but cold. The laughter he expected was nowhere to be found. Only silence. He frowned, pausing when he heard a muffled voice. Claudia's. Her tone was sharp, cutting through the stillness like glass shattering underwater. Then came a whimper. Edward's smile faded. He approached the sitting room door, barely cracked open. Inside, Claudia stood tall, elegant in a satin dress. Her face flawless, her posture commanding. But her voice carried venom. "You think spilling water is a small thing, Grace," she hissed. "You embarrassed me in front of the guests yesterday, and now you're clumsy again?" Grace, barely 10, knelt on the carpet, trembling. Eli, older, kept his arm protectively around Noah, who looked ready to cry. "I'm sorry, Mama," Grace whispered, her voice breaking. Claudia's hand twitched, an instinctive flinch Edward had never seen before. "Sorry doesn't fix everything. You children need to learn respect." Edward's chest tightened. He wanted to step in, to say something, but Nora, their longtime housekeeper, appeared from the corner of the room. Her eyes met Edward's through the gap in the door, wide with alarm. She shook her head slightly. "Don't. Not now." Edward froze. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The lilies slipped from his fingers, landing softly on the carpet beside his shoe. When Claudia finally turned away from the children, her face softened instantly, as if flipping a switch. She smiled sweetly toward the door, not realizing Edward was there. "Dinner will be served soon. Go to your rooms." The children scrambled away, their small footsteps echoing up the stairs. Edward stepped back quickly, pressing against the wall as Claudia passed by. Her perfume brushed the air, a scent he once loved. Now it made him sick. When she disappeared down the hallway, Nora approached him quickly, whispering, "Sir, please, don't confront her right now. It'll only make things worse for the children." Edward's eyes were wild, his jaw clenched. "What was that? What did I just see?" Nora's face paled. "You saw enough, sir. But you need to see more before you say anything." "What do you mean?" Nora swallowed hard. "I've been recording things. Hidden cameras. I didn't want to believe it either, but Mrs. Langston, she's been hurting them. Not just yelling, sir. It's worse." The words hit Edward like a hammer. "You're saying Claudia, my wife, is abusing our children?" Nora nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yes. I wouldn't have said a word if I wasn't sure. Please, sir, watch before you confront her." You'll understand everything. Edward stumbled back a step, shaking his head. His mind refused to process it. Claudia, the elegant woman who charmed every dinner guest, who smiled for photographs, who held his hand at charity galas, was a monster behind closed doors. He ran a hand over his face, whispering, "No, no, this can't be real." Nora touched his arm gently. "Sir, you've been gone so often. I tried to protect them when I could, but she always found a way when I wasn't around." Edward's chest heaved as the reality sank in. "Show me," he finally said, his voice barely audible. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Edward sat alone in his study. The house was still, the only sound the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. Nora entered quietly and placed her phone on the desk before him. "I didn't know who else to tell," she said, her voice trembling. Edward nodded once, unable to speak. He pressed play. The video began, Claudia's voice, cold and sharp. She was yelling at Eli this time, accusing him of breaking her favorite vase. The boy tried to explain that it had been an accident. She didn't listen. She threw the broken pieces near his feet, her voice dripping with contempt. Edward watched in stunned silence, every second cutting deeper into him. His hands shook. His lips trembled. In another clip, Grace sobbed quietly as Claudia locked her in the pantry for talking back. Nora's faint voice could be heard pleading for her release, but Claudia's response was icy. "If you can't respect me, you can starve a little." Edward stopped the video, slamming his hand on the desk. Enough. Tears welled in his eyes. He stared into the darkness of the study, his reflection ghostly in the window pane. His heart broke into pieces. The woman he thought was his partner, his peace, had been the source of his children's fear. He whispered, voice cracking, "My God, what have I done?" If Claudia had only been their stepmother, perhaps his heart wouldn't have ached so deeply. He'd have argued with anyone who claimed that a woman who had lived with a man for years and borne him 3 children could harm them. But this was his cruel reality. He had dismissed her extravagant lifestyle and endless demands as harmless flaws. His constant business trips hadn't helped either. They had blinded him to the truth hiding behind her perfect facade. It shattered him to realize that Claudia had faked love and happiness for years. Not for him, not for the children she bore, but for his money. He buried his face in his hands, the sound of his ragged breathing filling the room. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, as if the heavens themselves grieved with him. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Langston mansion, casting long shadows across the dining hall. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the quiet clink of porcelain. Claudia sat at the head of the table, her poise flawless as always. She poured herself a cup of tea, the picture of calm elegance, as if last night's cruelty had never happened. Across from her sat Edward, silent, unreadable, his gaze fixed on the cup before him. The children sat between them, their shoulders stiff. No one dared speak. "Eli," Claudia said sweetly, her smile delicate. "Pass the butter, darling." Eli flinched slightly at the word darling before obeying. His hands trembled, nearly dropping the dish. Claudia's smile twitched, irritation flickering behind her perfect composure. Edward noticed. Every small flinch, every fearful glance. His fork clattered onto the plate, startling everyone. Claudia's eyes lifted. "Is something wrong, Edward?" He hesitated, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I just realized. I've missed too many breakfasts like this." Claudia's lips curved into a calculated smile. "Work keeps you busy, my love. We understand. Do you?" Edward thought bitterly. His chest ached with guilt and disbelief. The rest of breakfast passed in heavy silence. When it ended, the children excused themselves quickly, practically fleeing the room. Edward's gaze followed them, his heart twisting at how they avoided their mother's eyes. Claudia reached for his hand. "You seem distracted lately. Is something on your mind?" Her touch felt like ice. He pulled away gently. "Just tired. Maybe I'll take the day off." She blinked in surprise. "You? Taking a day off? That's new." Edward forced a smile. "There's a first time for everything." She stood, brushing invisible dust from her dress. "Well, in that case, I'll be at the charity luncheon. Don't wait up for me. I might be late." He nodded, pretending to sip his coffee until she turned away. As her heels clicked toward the door, his voice stopped her. "Claudia." She paused, turning gracefully. "Yes." He hesitated, masking the rage swirling in his gut. I love our children, you know. More than anything. A strange flicker crossed her face, something almost mocking. Of course you do, and so do I, my love. And with that, she was gone. The moment the car pulled away, Edward let out the breath he'd been holding. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone. He dialed Nora. Bring me everything, he said quietly. Every file, every clip, every message. Within minutes, Nora entered the study with a folder thick enough to make his stomach turn. Sir, some of these are recent. She's careful when staff are nearby, but the kids' rooms, she thinks they're safe there. Edward nodded, his expression darkening. No child should feel unsafe in their own room. He opened the folder. More photos, more recordings, more horror. One showed bruises along Eli's arm. Another, Grace's tear-streaked face reflected in the mirror as Claudia yelled at her off-screen. In every frame, Edward could see fear, deep, conditioned fear. His chest tightened with rage. He slammed the folder shut. This ends tonight. Nora hesitated. Sir, you need a plan. If she senses you know, she'll twist the truth. She's clever, and she's already warned the children not to lie about her. Edward turned toward the window, his reflection fractured against the glass. Then I'll make sure the truth speaks louder than her lies. That evening, Claudia returned home glowing with satisfaction. She swept into the living room, still in her designer heels, her voice light as a melody. Children, Mommy's home. No answer. Her smile faltered. Then she heard faint voices from the study. Edward's voice. She walked closer. And the bruises? Edward asked softly. Eli's hesitant reply broke through. She said they were my fault. That I fell. Grace added, barely whispering, We're not supposed to tell you anything, Daddy. Claudia's heart slammed against her ribs. She froze just beyond the door, her perfect facade cracking. Inside, Edward's voice was low, shaking. It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. You can tell me the truth. Grace's lip quivered. She hits us sometimes. When she's mad. Or when people visit. She makes us act happy, so they don't know. Claudia's breath caught. Panic surged in her chest. She turned to leave, but Edward's voice came again, harder now. You can come in, Claudia. She froze mid-step. Slowly, she turned. Edward stood in the doorway, his eyes burning with quiet fury. For the first time, Claudia didn't smile. Edward, Save it, he said sharply. I've seen the videos. Her blood ran cold. Videos. He took a step forward, holding up Nora's phone. Hidden cameras. Every cruel word. Every slap. Every time you made our children afraid to breathe in their own home. Claudia's face blanched, but she quickly composed herself, adopting her well-practiced charm. You can't be serious. That woman, Nora, she's lying. You know she's always resented me. Edward's voice trembled, anger and heartbreak colliding. I saw you, Claudia. There's no denying it. She laughed softly, stepping closer. You've been gone too long, Edward. You've lost touch with reality. Children exaggerate. Nora manipulates. You. Enough. His shout shook the walls. The children flinched behind him, retreating into Nora's arms. Claudia's mask slipped. For a heartbeat, Edward saw it. The coldness beneath her polished smile, the fury in her eyes. You'd throw away everything we've built, she hissed, because of a few videos taken out of context? Everything you built, he corrected, his tone sharp as a blade. A perfect lie. You fooled everyone, Claudia, even me. But not anymore. She tilted her head, voice low and dangerous. If you expose me, I'll make sure you lose them. I'll tell the world you're unfit, that you left them to suffer while you traveled. Who do you think they'll believe? The charming wife or the absent husband? Edward's fists clenched. He wanted to scream, to break something, but his voice came out steady. They'll believe the truth. Because this time, I'll show them. Later that night, Claudia stormed into their bedroom, pacing like a caged animal. She poured herself a drink, her hand trembling. He thinks he can ruin me, she muttered under her breath. He has no idea who he's dealing with. Her reflection in the mirror glared back. Perfect makeup, flawless hair, but the cracks were showing. She picked up her phone and dialed. I want every recording in this house gone by tomorrow. Understand? Every file, every trace. But Nora had already anticipated that. By morning, copies of the footage were safely backed up in multiple drives, and one was already on its way to someone who would make sure the truth came to light. Edward didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint hum of the rain outside. His heart broke again and again as he replayed the videos, the voices, the tears. He whispered to himself, "They'll never be afraid again." Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating his reflection, haunted, resolute, and burning with the promise of justice. Morning arrived gray and heavy over Ravenhill. The rain had stopped, but the air carried that thick, uneasy stillness that always comes before a storm of a different kind. Edward stood in the study, his eyes hollow from a sleepless night. On the desk lay the folder Nora had given him. Now open, its contents spread like open wounds across the polished wood. Nora entered quietly, a steaming mug in her hand. "You need strength for what's coming," she said softly, placing it down. Edward looked up at her, exhaustion etched deep into his face. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing, Nora?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Protecting your children will never be wrong, even if it costs you everything else." He exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the desk. "Then I suppose it's time." By mid-morning, Claudia's world began to tremble. Her phone buzzed nonstop, messages from friends, colleagues, and the charity board she chaired. She picked it up, confusion turning to dread as she scrolled through. "Is this real? Claudia, how could you? You're trending everywhere." She opened the first link. And there it was, her face, her voice, her rage. The footage had leaked online. Every cruel word, every act of control. The perfect image she'd built for years, the loving wife, the devoted mother, shattered in seconds. "No, no, this can't be happening," she whispered, her voice trembling. She hurled the phone against the wall. It cracked, the sound echoing through the vast emptiness of the house. Moments later, she was on the phone, calling her lawyer, her PR team, anyone who could stop the bleeding. But it was too late. The story had spread too far, too fast. Edward didn't watch the chaos unfold. He didn't need to. He was at his lawyer's office, his children sitting quietly beside him. Grace held a small stuffed rabbit, worn from years of comfort. Eli leaned against her shoulder, silent but calm for the first time in weeks. Nora sat behind them, a reassuring presence. The lawyer slid the custody papers across the table. "Are you certain you want to file for emergency removal? The public fallout will be massive." Edward's eyes darkened with resolve. "I'm not thinking about the press. I'm thinking about my kids." The lawyer nodded, then stamped the papers. The sound was final, a seal on years of denial and pain. Back at the Langston mansion, Claudia paced the marble floors like a trapped predator. Her hands shook as she packed a small suitcase, tossing in jewelry, perfume, anything of value. The doorbell rang. She froze. Through the frosted glass, she saw a familiar silhouette. Edward. He stepped inside quietly, his expression unreadable. Behind him, two officers stood by the car, waiting. Claudia's voice trembled between anger and desperation. "You're humiliating me, Edward. Do you realize what you've done? You've destroyed our family." He looked at her with a sadness that ran bone deep. "No, Claudia, you destroyed it. I'm just saving what's left." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "You think the children will thank you for this? You've turned them against their mother." Edward shook his head slowly. "They stopped seeing you as their mother the moment they started fearing you." That broke something in her. For a moment, her mask cracked completely, her eyes wild, mascara streaking down her face. "I did everything for them. Everything. They needed discipline, not weakness." Edward stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "They needed love." Claudia's breathing quickened. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." He handed her a folded document. "The court order says you can't come near them for now. Please, don't make this harder than it already is." For a long, trembling second, she said nothing. Then, with a trembling hand, she snatched the suitcase and brushed past him. Her heels clicked across the marble floor, sharp, fading echoes that marked the end of a reign built on cruelty. The door shut behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening, heavy, but liberating. Later that evening, the house was quiet again. The children sat curled up on the couch, a blanket around them. Nora brought in cups of cocoa, the sweet scent warming the air. Edward stood in the doorway, watching them, his heart aching and healing all at once. Grace noticed him first. "Daddy, is she gone?" He nodded softly. "Yes, sweetheart. She won't hurt you anymore." Eli looked up from his mug, eyes wide and uncertain. Are we safe now? Edward knelt beside them, pulling both children into his arms. You're safe, he whispered, and you'll never be alone again. I promise. Nora smiled faintly from the doorway, tears glistening in her eyes. That night, after the children were asleep, Edward walked through the house, the same hallways that once echoed with fear and tension. Now, they were quiet. He stopped at the doorway of the study. On the desk lay a photo frame, one he hadn't looked at in months. It was of him, Claudia, and the kids, smiling on some long-ago vacation. He picked it up, staring at the illusion of happiness frozen in glass. Slowly, he set it face down. He turned toward the window. The rain had begun again, soft and steady, a gentle cleansing of the night. Nora's voice came from behind him. The kids are asleep. They asked if you could read to them tomorrow morning. He smiled faintly. I'd like that. She hesitated, then stepped closer. You did the right thing, sir. It's going to take time, but they'll heal. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the housekeeper who'd stayed when things got unbearable, but the quiet strength that had held his family together when he couldn't. Thank you, Nora, he said softly, for everything. She smiled. We're all family now, whether by blood or by choice. Edward nodded, his voice barely a whisper. Then let's start over. Outside, dawn began to rise over Ravenhill. The first golden light slipped through the windows, warming the cold corners of the once dark home. Laughter drifted faintly from upstairs, the sound of the children waking, free from fear for the first time in years. Edward closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight lift. The Langston home, once haunted by silence and cruelty, was finally alive again. And as the light grew stronger, it carried a quiet truth, that healing wasn't found in revenge or control, but in love, courage, and the choice to begin again. 3 months later, Ravenhill basked in the soft warmth of spring. The once gray mansion at the top of Maplewood Hill looked different now. Its windows open, curtains fluttering, laughter echoing through rooms that used to tremble in silence. Edward stood by the garden, sleeves rolled up, helping Eli fix the wheels on his bicycle. Grace and Noah chased each other around the fountain, their giggles filling the air. From the kitchen window, Nora watched them, smiling as she wiped her hands on her apron. The smell of baked bread drifted out, mingling with the scent of blooming lilacs. The Langston home, once a house of fear, now pulsed with life. All right, champ, Edward said, steadying Eli's bike. Ready? Eli hesitated, his voice small. You won't let go, right? Edward crouched beside him, eyes soft. I'll always be right here. But you've got to trust yourself, too. Eli nodded, took a deep breath, and began to pedal. The bike wobbled, steadied, and for the first time, Edward didn't rush to hold it. He just watched, heart swelling as his son found balance on his own. Nora stepped outside, clapping gently. Look at him go. That's courage right there. Edward turned, smiling. He's learning fast. She gave him a knowing look. Just like his father. He chuckled quietly, brushing a leaf from his shirt. I'm still learning, too. Inside later that afternoon, the family gathered in the living room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything in warm gold. Grace was sprawled on the rug coloring. Noah built a tower of blocks, and Eli proudly showed Nora his scraped knee, his badge of bravery. Edward watched them with quiet gratitude. It wasn't perfect. Nightmares still came sometimes, silence still lingered on certain mornings, but they were healing. Together, Nora poured tea and sat beside him. You've come a long way, Edward. They trust you now. They laugh again. He nodded, eyes glistening. Some nights I still wake up thinking I'm too late, that she's still here. Then I hear their laughter, and I know I finally did something right. Nora smiled. You did what a father should. You chose love over fear. Edward looked at her, the corners of his lips lifting softly. And you gave us a chance to start over. I'll never forget that. She looked down, flustered. I only did what needed to be done. No, Nora, he said quietly. You did what was right. Their eyes met for a moment. Not romantic, but deeply human, threaded with shared strength and gratitude. That night, after tucking the children into bed, Edward sat alone in his study. The same desk that once held pain now carried lighter things. Eli's school project, Grace's drawings, Noah's tiny handprint in paint. He opened his journal and began to write. We were broken once. a house full of silence and fear. But love has a way of seeping through cracks, rebuilding even what we thought was lost. Maybe true wealth isn't in the things we own, but in the hearts we protect. Maybe courage isn't about fighting others, but facing what's been hidden in ourselves. He paused, gazing out the window. The moon hung full and bright, silver light glimmering over the garden. Downstairs, Nora hummed softly as she cleaned up the kitchen, the same lullaby the children now fell asleep to every night. Edward smiled faintly, whispering, "Thank you," to no one and everyone at once. 2 months later, summer evening. A soft breeze rippled through the yard as Edward adjusted his camera. "All right, everyone, closer. Let's get a good one." The children gathered on the garden bench, Nora standing behind them, her hand resting on Grace's shoulder. "Ready?" Edward asked. "Ready," they shouted in unison. He pressed the shutter. Click. The photo captured more than faces. It caught peace. The kind that comes after storms. As he looked through the camera's screen, Edward's expression softened. There was an empty space beside him in the frame, the place Claudia used to stand during every family portrait. He stared at it for a brief moment. No bitterness, just understanding. Some spaces, he realized, weren't meant to be filled again. They were reminders of lessons learned, of courage found, of the love that rose from the ashes. Later, as the sun began to set, the family gathered around the table on the patio. Plates of food, laughter, and chatter filled the evening. Grace leaned her head on Nora's arm. "I like it when we all eat together," she said softly. Nora smiled. "So do I, sweetheart." Edward raised his glass. "To family, not the one we were born with, but the one we build with love." The children clinked their cups together, giggling. As the house glowing behind them, Edward's voice narrated gently, steady and full of warmth. "In the end, it wasn't success or wealth that saved us. It was courage, the courage to see, to act, and to love. And when I finally opened my eyes, I realized that the home I'd been searching for was right here all along." We've come to the end of this story. Sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do isn't fighting the world. It's choosing to protect what's worth saving, even when it breaks their heart to do so. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more powerful stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Edward's journey. What would you have done if you were in his shoes?